So in Latin, do means, and you know, you pronounce it do because in Latin always the O is pronounced as a O sound, as opposed to, you would want to call it do because of English, but it's pronounced do. That means I give. Okay, so do, I give. And then datus, as usual, the second verbal form is the passive. So it means having been given. And as you can imagine, when you talk about a date, okay, when you talk about the date something happens, you might find it interesting how it comes about, that it comes from the root meaning to give. Okay, so that's I think one of the last words we're going to get to under this root. Okay, and then notice there, after it says do and datus, I have the square brackets that says from Greek, because in Greece, quite often, as is the case, there is a Greek verb from which the Latin verb is derived, and then by extension the English verb is, and the words built from the root are derived from Latin. So it goes all the way back to Greek, and so there are going to be a couple words we deal with that come from the Greek, and the rest will come from the Latin, but just do know that they are what's called cognate, which is another way to say related to each other. All right, so we start with maybe the most interesting one because it's so short, and it looks very Germanic because it's so short. You know, it looks so simple. You add, right? And then, but the fact that it's the opposite of subtract, which is, or I should say by the end of the semester will be obviously to you, if it isn't already, from Latin, okay, because we're going to have trajo eventually, meaning to drag. To drag away is subtraction, kind of cool. What's the opposite of dragging away? The opposite of subtract is addition, addition. So what is it? It's short. It's a contraction. It's short for add-do. Okay, we're very used to add, and in this case, yea, we actually get the prefix in and of itself, not changed chameleon-like into some other form because of what the root begins with that follows it. In this case, we keep the D because the D of the D after it. The question, though, is where does that D after it come from? It's a contraction of add-do, okay? To give to give toward. Look at 2 plus 2 equals 4. You start with the 2. How is 2 plus 2 equals 4 addition? You're giving the second 2 to or toward the first 2. Add-do, give toward, and that's addition. Okay, addition, state of, because you guys know that the ION means state of. Okay, aditus, and you see at the very top of the slide, it says datus, having been given, and get used to it. Quite often vowels change, right? And so ditus equals datus. It's just yet one of many changes of vowel over time, reflecting the way words are said. Okay, just like ain't comes from is not, etc. Okay? When you donate to somebody, you're giving, yes, okay, but give is Germanic. You know that the suffix ate means to make, to do or make, and then the do means give, so it means what? To do or make giving. So to do giving, okay, so it's kind of redundant in a way, but it's just emphasizing the fact that you're giving. And the main reason why donate is pretty much synonymous with give, and you know, we don't just say do or dot or something like that, is that it's pretty much covered by give. You know, when we say that we're going to give something to someone, think about it. You say give. You know, there's no real synonym for give that we would use. You know, you give someone a gift. You don't donate a gift. Well, yeah, you do. You know, if you you know, usually to a cause or usually to an association of some kind. But when you're talking about friends, you don't usually talk about donating a gift to them as much as giving a gift to them. So there we go again, example number 10,020 of being able to pretty much choose from the Germanic side or the Latin side. And again, when I say Germanic, I'm talking about Anglo-Saxon, and that makes a lot more sense to you now. Okay, donation, state of donating. Okay, so to making a gift, to making giving. Okay. Then there's a quote from Martin Luther King: "One who condones evils is just as guilty as the one who perpetrates it." Okay, so condone. What does condone mean? The don, forget about the ne ending. That's through French. Okay, that's purely linguistic. The idea here is, and so in other words, I won't ask you what the suffix is if I give you this word in a quiz or an exam. Just the prefix and the root. And so obviously the root is the do, give. And then to give what? To condone, to give with, or to give together with. What does it mean? In the context of this quote by Martin Luther King, it means that if something evil occurs, by condoning it, you are, figuratively speaking, giving yourself together with, or with that bad thing. Okay, you're giving yourself with that bad thing. You're adding your energy to it. You can kind of, this root of give can be played around with a little bit. So you can say, I'm adding my energy to that thing. Don't give them any of your energy. And someone is a waste of time and just an a-hole or something, and people say, oh, don't waste your energy on that person. Don't add yourself to that person. Don't give yourself odd that person to that person. Or if that person does something bad, don't condone their behavior. Don't give yourself to or with or together with their behavior. Okay? When you pardon, quite often the expression and the phenomenon, presidential pardon, you'll hear about. So what is a pardon? Interestingly, and very rarely, by the way, in this case, the par is per, P-E-R, and we know that. We know it means through. Okay? So this is a rare case of the E in a prefix turning into an A, and that's through French. Okay? It has to do with the change of through Old French. Okay, so pardon, to give through. So what does it mean? To give of yourself through, that means all the way through. Okay, comprehensively. When you pardon someone for something, it means you completely forgive them. Okay, even if it doesn't. In other words, it's used incorrectly sometimes. You pardon someone, I'm still pissed off at them. No, that's not a complete pardon. Pardon means it's all over. It's all over. Okay, so all the way through, that means through, and then the don, to give through. And then in the less kind of emotionally weighted way, when someone makes the joke, pardon my French, or just if someone bumps into you and sees, in France, pardon, pardon, what does it mean? It means forgive me completely. Sorry, I was, think about it. If you bump into someone and there's a situation where there's some stuff going on that is a little bit emotionally questionable, someone said, like if someone's talking at a giving a speech or something, and you're known to not agree with that person, and then you're walking, and then by mistake you bump into them. Oh, pardon. The idea here is that I'm completely, none of what's going on in here should factor in to the fact that there was a complete mistake of me bumping into you just now. It wasn't symbolic, like I'm kind of pissed at you and I passive-aggressively bumped into you. The idea, even in this case, is completely forgive me. Okay, don't. Yeah, cool, thanks. Okay, so don't, realize that it was completely unintentional is the bottom line. Okay, that's the pardon. Kind of interesting. This root, do, is one of the more interesting ones in the sense of its flexibility. The variety, and we're really barely touching the surface here. Lots and lots of words, certainly top 5 of all English roots. There's a diversity of ways to make words out of this root that is all over the place in order to reflect the fact that giving, right, is one of the more basic activities that we engage in, and so it makes sense that would be a really important root. And so when you give a dose of something to someone, in this case, if I asked you this word, it would just be asking for the root. Okay, it's a giving. A dose is a giving. All right, literally, through French. Oh, so lots of words with this root of do are done through French, and it has a lot to do with the fact that in French, donner means to give. Okay, so donner. It's also preserved in French as well as all these English words that are built from this root. All right, so then when you endow a university, for example. You have some money and you're a philanthropist of some kind. You love the university, or you love a department in the university, and you want to spread your wealth a little bit because you love them so much. The idea here is that you endow the university, or you give them an endowment, a state of endowing, giving into what? The treasury, the coffers, the wealth of that department, so you can do something with it. So it's kind of a fancy way to say donate, but with the emphasis on this prefix "n," which is the same as "in," meaning in or into. So the idea here is that you're pretty much contributing to, or putting money, usually, into the treasury of that school, something like that. Okay, that's the emphasis there. All right? That's a fancy way of saying to give. Endowment, as we know, is just state of doing that. All right, now dowry is an interesting phenomenon in various cultures around the world. I don't want to talk about it too long because I don't want to get all, there are even signs of it in our history in America. This idea that the father of a bride gives a certain gift of usually a lot of money or whatever they can afford to the wife and the husband in order to get them started off on good track in their lives. Okay, so property or money brought by a bride to her husband on their marriage. Just so you know that's where that word comes from, and that it's also connected to the word endow. Okay, and remember that's the very word in the Declaration of Independence that caused us to get into this root in the first place. All right, now I find this interesting. This is a nice little history lesson, real quick one, about where the word date comes from. It all comes down to dating, or coming up with when a particular thing was delivered from one person to another in the days before there was electronic communication, a telegraph, let alone the internet. Okay, and when the only way you could convey a message to someone far away was to hand it to someone, a messenger, a courier. Remember kuro, run, someone who runs. Okay, and they would deliver it to whoever you've addressed it to. Okay, and so the idea here is whenever that letter changed hands, whenever it was given, datus, and that moment of handing the letter to them, that's the date. That's what we today would call the postmark of that letter. And that's where, interesting, right? That's where the whole idea of dating comes from handing a letter over to someone. Kind of nice to know that, right? And then, of course, there are extensions of the word. We talk about someone going out on a date. That's just pointing out to the fact that they have set an appointed time to go out somewhere, as opposed to it being spontaneous and not planned. Okay, but obviously it goes back further than that to the meaning of simply handing something off at a given time. Okay, another way of thinking of it is just whenever something occurs, that's when the event is given. That's when the time that you and the date that you give for when it occurred. Okay, now I'm going to get a little languagey again. I know, maybe half of you love that stuff, half of you hated it, at the beginning of the semester, but it was good for you, believe me, it was good vitamins, good linguistic vitamins. But here's another little linguistic vitamin I'm going to get into. I just can't help myself, okay? First of all, the eve, the IVE, the iv, that's just a state of thing, that's just a being suffix, okay? Remember that, okay, from dativus in Latin. Okay, so I find this damn interesting. All right, so I pointed out to you guys how one of the differences between a highly inflected language like ancient Greek or Latin and English is that English is so less inflected, has so fewer words that have endings on them that determine how they fit into a sentence. So for example, to the dog is 3 different words, and dog stays the same, whereas in Latin or Greek, dog will change. That word will change based on if it means to the, if it means of the, if it means in the, if it means out of the, all these different ways of saying this thing will all be, this combination of ideas will be determined by the endings of words. And that's what's going on here when we look at this, chart here of the different, what are called cases of a Latin noun. Okay, so the nominative case is the case for the subject. So we'll stick with dogs. I love dogs so much. The dog walks. That's the dog being the subject of a sentence. Okay, it's called nominative because you're naming what is pretty much the feature, the main feature of the sentence, what that dog is going to do. And you're going to link that up with the predicate, which incorporates the main verb of the sentence, right? Okay, which means the main word, by the way. Verbum, literally in Latin, means word. Okay, genitive, that's a whole can of worms that I'm going to skip right now, but it means pretty much of. So the food of the dog was delicious. Okay, of the dog. So that means the dog's food. So that's the genitive. When we get into that root, we'll get into genitive. Okay, we will, because that's a giant root. The gen root has to do with generation and things becoming something. Okay, so we'll get into that later. But dative, let's jump on the dative. What does it mean? Dative, obviously, as you know, means the state of giving. Why would that be? Because the classic use of the dative case in Latin, in Greek, in any language really, even if there's multiple words that express it, like in English, rather than one word, as in Latin or Greek, such as to the something. Okay, dative would be the indirect object, and hopefully we all are familiar with that from high school or something, junior high or even this idea of I, the subject, give, verb, a gift, direct object, to the teacher. Well, I don't want to give you ideas. I give a gift to my father. Okay, to my father. All right, that's an indirect object. Why? Because the classic instance of the dative case is using the verb give. I give something. That's the direct object, and that would be in the accusative case, by the way. To somebody. And that's the dative. Why? Because that's the case used with verbs of giving, and then there are other verbs too that it's used with. Okay? So it's kind of interesting. And so when you learn grammar in whatever language you take, try to just understand how these different cases, when it comes to nouns and then various other aspects of verbs, person, number, tense, voice, mood, usually, works. And then it'll be more than just a chore to memorize things. You'll actually understand how they work. Okay, this is one of those Greek words I was telling you about. Okay, let's see. Okay, so antidote. Anta means against, just like it, very close to what we learned anti in Latin as well. So anti means against, and then dote means given. Something given against. So some kind of formula or liquid or medicine or something like that given against some illness or infirmity or something you want to get rid of. Antidote. Given against. It literally means that. And then finally, in some ways my favorite word out of all of these, because it's a good word even though it gets a bad rap, tradition. What does it mean? ION means the state of, as you all know, so it means being. Dit means dat. Dit means dat, so given. And the tra, you tell me, what do you think? What prefix is tra? From the prefixes that we know. Go ahead. Very nice. Yes, we're leaving out the N and the S. Okay. Why? Because it's easier to say tradition than transition. Bottom line. Okay? What is tradition? It's the state of giving across. It's the state of generations leaving things for later generations to benefit from. Kind of neat, huh? So in this case, you have the Chinese Spring Festival, I think it is, and then you have the tradition of Christmas with the Christmas tree, etc. That's one type of tradition that you could talk about. Various holidays and things that give people a temporal sense of belonging to the same society as opposed to a spatial. So it's one thing to convince everybody in the United States at one time that they all belong to the same country, but it's another to emphasize that connection through time as well. And that's what tradition has to do with. And so when you take a class in ancient Greek tradition or Roman or both, say in our department, in classics, what you're dealing with is you're dealing with that. You're dealing with what has been passed down to us, given across the ages to us in order to benefit from, not only in a positive way, but if you take, say, what is it, 340, I think, or I forget what it is, but in the fall, I'm teaching one of those civ classes in our department. We deal a lot with not only what is carried over to us from the past that is beneficial and good and noble, but also horrible, that, such as slavery, such as the way women were treated in ancient Greece and Rome, and things like that. It's good to know where stuff comes from, even if it's hard to look at and you flinch from it. You have to look it straight in the eye so that you do the best you can not to repeat the errors of those in the past. Okay, so there's more or less unintentional tradition, things handed down to us from the past that weren't intended to be prohibitive, but are, and so there's a lot to learn from the past and history in general, and don't get me started on it, but history is important, you guys, to learn from the past.